Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boston Balling. I'm your host, as always, Gabby Hurlbut, and I'm really, really pleased to welcome in my good friend Sierra Keat with me today. Hi, Sierra.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. When I heard you were starting a podcast about Boston sports, I was thrilled that you were doing this, and I am so excited to be here on the show with you.
Yeah, I'm definitely so excited to have you too with your all of your knowledge and your passion for Boston sports teams as well. So
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to getting into it. But before we get started and jump in on the sports aspect, just tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing now and how it pertains to sports. Because for those of you that don't know, Sierra is very much still involved in sports. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, so I am a Division III assistant rowing coach at Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. I also coach a master's rowing team called the Gray Knights Rowing Club. So even after my departure from college and sports radio, and from even being a former student athlete on the Ithaca crew and sculling teams, I am still very much engaged with the sports world and am now on the coaching side of things, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that is definitely really cool. How do you find that the coaching side is different from being an athlete in terms of the mindset going into competitions and everything like that?
So it's interesting because obviously, as an athlete, you're the one that, like, the training plans are designed for you and the race plans are for you. Like, everything is structured for you to succeed. As a coach, now my job is to structure my athletes to succeed. So build workouts and race plans that will allow them to thrive. So it's so great being able to share my passions and my enthusiasm for the world of sports with others now.
Yeah, no, it's definitely very, very cool, and I think it was awesome to hear when you got your coaching job at Catholic because I was like,
Mhm.
that's right up her alley. So that's super exciting. So we're definitely really, really happy to have you on the show. I know everyone else is excited to have you too. So with that, I am definitely really excited to have a good discussion with you today. So the first thing that I want to discuss is how the Patriots have gone from kind of being this very, 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 rocky, not so good team at the beginning of the season. They started off 2-5. Everyone thought that they were kind of out of it altogether. Now they're 6-6. They only have a few games left, and 3 out of those 4 games they play teams in their division that they've either already beaten or come close to beaten. So, how do you feel that where they're at now is different from where they were before? And do you think that they have a chance to make a playoff run with where they stand right now?
So I think personally it's been a really difficult and interesting year for the Patriots. Not only is Tom Brady gone and Cam Newton has stepped into the role, but then you also have COVID thrown in as a factor. And with that, that's really shaken things up because I think, like Brian said the week before, there were no preseason games. So
Mm-hmm.
Cam Newton stepped in literally the first regular season game with not really much practice or anything like that. And then I also think that it's really been I would call this a building year for the Patriots. I don't think this is the last we'll see or hear from them, but I think the dynasty as we know it has shifted. And ultimately, I think you and I really got to grow up in the golden age of Boston sports. I mean, you had the Patriots, you had and all their success, you had the Red Sox, who won their first World Series game back in 2002, was it? Or 2003?
2004.
2004, yes. I knew it was in the early 2000s. But yeah, and then all the success they've had from there. And then also the Boston Bruins winning a few Stanley Cups in there as well. Like, we've really been so lucky and so fortunate to see all of this success and all these incredible athletes and coaches, but ultimately now that has shifted, and it's interesting to see what's going to happen. I think the Patriots are a team that you can't count them out until they've
out.
yeah, like even when you think they're out, they come back. I mean, think about the Super Bowl a few years ago with the Atlanta Falcons and the Patriots. The Patriots were down 27-3 and still made a comeback to win it. Like,
yeah.
I think that just shows the resilience that the team has and has had in years past. And I'm hoping that they are able to rebuild that resiliency in the new players that they have and the new team. And I think change is always uncomfortable, but it can also be really beneficial in the long run. So I think at this point, the Patriots team and organization kind of needs to just trust the process and wrinkle out or smooth out what needs to be smoothed out. But ultimately, I think that this dynasty isn't over yet, and maybe they won't make a playoff this season. I mean, who knows? I was looking into their schedule earlier and kind of their standings, and they're not. So up next, their last 4 games of the season are with the LA Rams, the Dolphins, the Bills, and the Jets. The Patriots at Florida with the Dolphins, in the last couple of years, they've somehow always managed to not do well on the road there.
Yeah, so it's very bizarre. It's a constant pattern. They just can't play well in Miami.
It really is. It's so bizarre. And it's just like, it's always one of those games that you think is going to be an easy win, and then they just drop the ball on it. I think that happened earlier this year. The Patriots, the Patriots beat the Dolphins earlier this year.
They did, yeah, which is actually looking to be a more impressive win now than it looked to be at the time, because the Dolphins have actually been playing really well lately. So
exactly.
It's looking to be a pretty good win that they had there early on in the season. But the question is, can they do that again?
Exactly. And I think that's always the question with them. I'm hoping they can. And then the Bills have been doing really well this year. I know they recruited a bunch of new players this year, and they also got very lucky in terms of their scheduling too. So, I mean, because I remember even reading their schedule at the start of the year, and I was just like, come on, really? How are they lucking out on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you were saying. I mean, it's hard to really count out the Patriots, especially when they have a coach like Bill Belichick who can make it work with what he has. And when Cam came onto the team, it was hard to know what to expect from him because he wasn't playing that well when he was in Carolina. So it was hard to really know what he was going to do, but people had optimism because he was coming into a Bill Belichick system. So you can't not have hope when Belichick is the coach that he can make it work and integrate people into his system. So
exactly.
It's almost like as long as Belichick is there, you can't really count them out because he's the greatest coach of all time. So if you don't have Bill Belichick, I'd say it's a different story. But this year, with everything that's happened to them, with, like you mentioned before, with COVID and all the obstacles and not being able to practice because their facilities were shut down, and Cam having to learn a new system, and the offense and defense both not being consistent, and them still being 6-6 right now, we're kind of having a very different conversation, I think, than we did last week, because they just blew out the Chargers this weekend, which granted, the Chargers haven't really had a good season either. But
but it was still a pleasant surprise.
It was, yeah. I mean, both sides of the ball, they were looking really good. And if they play that, that's the type of football that everyone needs to see. And I think now people are starting to worry a little that the Patriots are still on the cusp there in the hunt. And if they beat the Bills and the Dolphins, then we're looking at a very, very different story here than we've been looking at the past few weeks.
Exactly. And not only that, but even like they have the chance. So if they beat the Dolphins are 8-4 right now. So that would bring them to, let's see, that would bring the Patriots 7-6 and the Dolphins 8-5. So, and then if they beat the Bills have been 9-3. So I'm trying to see if, let's see. And then they also have to beat the Jets, who have been having a perfect losing season.
Yeah, well, the thing about the division is that, they've had some close games with the division. They barely beat the Jets earlier in the season.
Mm-hmm.
They lost to the Bills by 3, which they could have won that game. So it seems as if every time they play the division, even if the teams, and this seems to be a pattern every year too, even if the other teams in the division aren't that good, they always still seem to have close games against their own division.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's tough to really say and really have this conversation of, people feeling confident or not, because those 3 games against the division, all 3 of those games could very much go either way just based on how close the other divisional games have been in the past with them.
Mm-hmm. It really is. And also, I think another thing that's important to know is I feel like they've been utilizing kind of the earlier games and early losses, as the Patriots always seem to do, as learning experiences. And that's important because even if they lose to a team early on, they're usually able to flip that result at the end of the season and ultimately learn from that and thus come back and improve their record. So I'm hoping if they're able to do that, I think they could clinch a playoff spot. I'm not sure how far they'll go this year, but I think they could at least be in the running if they keep their momentum going. And again, another important factor too is also if nobody gets sick, nobody gets COVID, and going into the holidays, that's going to be important. Even as things get colder and people move inside, that's still a factor, which it makes this whole like new team dynamic even more challenging and more difficult because like not only do you have the excitement of a regular season and all of the question marks and what if of that, you also have a whole new team essentially. And then you have a global pandemic thrown into the mix. So it's just been this whole wild, wacky whirlwind of it's a season unlike any other, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I think that the pandemic, it's hard to know what anybody's going to do week to week because anybody could just test positive for COVID one day or the next day and not be able to play. And if that's somebody that's really important to your team,
like
then
Cam Newton earlier this season against what week was that? It was, I remember getting the news on my phone. I was just like, oh no.
Yeah, well,
No.
He was out for when they played the Chiefs.
Yes,
but they kept that game close, surprisingly, even though they didn't have Cam, which came as a shocker to everybody, I think, because the Chiefs are looking like the best team in the AFC this year. So they kept that game close, but they lost to the Broncos. But that was also that was the game right after their facilities got shut down when they couldn't practice. And, the Broncos haven't been good this year, so that was kind of a disappointing loss. But you have to take in all of those factors. They didn't get to practice for that whole week leading up to that game. So that definitely can hurt a team. And there's been some interesting results overall in the NFL this year. Even this past week, the Giants upset the Seahawks out of nowhere, and Washington upset the Steelers, which were both very big upsets. And there's conditions this year that I think play a factor overall that people forget to consider because we're not used to thinking about it that way. So
Exactly.
I think that there's certain things that are out of our control, and even, Bill Belichick obviously still is showing how good of a coach he is because he's making it work with what he has, and the talent offensively isn't exactly there either, and Cam doesn't have a lot of offensive weapons that they're used to having. And even with Brady, he didn't even have all of the offensive weapons in the world, but he could make it work with what he had. And Cam's not necessarily as good at catering to his offense's strengths. And I feel like with Tom Brady, he was really good at getting everybody in the offense involved and catering to their strengths, no matter who they were. So his offense was able to shine more because of it. But Cam's playing style is a lot different from that.
Exactly. It really is a lot different. I also noticed that even when I was watching the recap of the Chargers game, like he definitely has more of a running style where like he's quicker and he's not afraid to run the ball, whereas Tom was infamous for those long shots like across the field.
Targeting Gronk 75 yards away.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm really hoping that Cam's going to be able to get the offensive tools he needs to make that work. Again, I don't think it's going to be this season, but I'm really interested to see what 2021's draft is going to look like for the Patriots, because I think that will tell us a lot about the direction this team's going to go in.
I agree with you on that too. I think that the way that they utilize their draft picks are going to be extremely important this year. I think now more than ever with the transition period. Do you think that you could see Cam Newton as being a longer term solution for them, or do you think it would be worth trying to draft a quarterback and training them into the system and hopefully having them become the starter? Maybe even next year or the year after they maybe after the year after that, once they learn the system for a year or something like that, and having Cam be around for one more year and then try to train a new quarterback into the system.
I feel like they could do that, but ultimately, I mean, they've got a new quarterback this year.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they're going to necessarily want to have to go through the process again of bringing someone on. Now, if they decide that Cam Newton really isn't a good fit for this team and really isn't taking the team in the direction they want to go, then absolutely, yes, I would say, time to find someone else that's right for the job. But it's challenging because I feel like given the circumstances, we haven't really seen all of what Cam's able to do yet.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that too. And there are a lot of people that have been pretty quick to blame Cam for a lot of the Patriots' struggles this year. But it was a hard year to come onto this team and learn the system. And granted, there's been other quarterbacks that have been in the same position and coming into a new system as well. But it's really difficult to come onto an offense that people have been underperforming to expectations, and you get COVID and you're out and can't practice or play with the team, and that you lose some of your ability to perform well the next week when you're missing time with the team. So that's one factor. And also he does target players sometimes and people just drop passes. So I don't think it's totally all on Cam. I do think that he does need to play better, but I agree with you. I think that there's more that he can really do that we haven't been able to see yet. So I feel like it might be a little premature to just give up on him now, especially when it seems like he's starting to finally learn the system and how Bill Belichick's coaching style works, because that definitely takes getting used to also. And I think he's starting to build chemistry with some of the young players that he has. And that's something that we've seen glimpses of all season, but I don't think it's anything that really has been able to really be shown until the last couple of weeks when especially this past week against the Chargers when everything seemed to click on both sides of the ball. And if they play that kind of football, then maybe they can make it work with Cam.
I definitely think that's a possibility. And like you were saying earlier, the week their practice facilities were closed. Practice is key. The ability to get in the time necessary and the practice necessary to effectively prepare for a game, if that's taken away, that is absolutely devastating. And I think that has definitely been a factor in all of this. Has Cam Newton really gotten the amount of practice he needs to be an effective member of this team? And I personally would say no, he hasn't, because the preseason practices and games weren't allowed. And then he was out that period of time with COVID, and that time that the Patriots practice facility was closed. So with all those external factors happening, I don't feel like Cam's really gotten a fair shot yet. And I'm excited to see, with what I hope this vaccine is a light at the end of the tunnel for everyone. I hope that we can kind of see how he does under better circumstances. And ultimately, I think this experience is going to make him stronger as a player. I think it's going to make the team stronger in terms of its resiliency, because let's face it, if you can get through 2020, you can get through anything.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think that everybody can kind of take that out of this year, is that everybody's surviving 2020 and every team has gone through some sort of struggles this year. So if you can get through that, then everything else should be easier from there. But I definitely do agree with a lot of what you're saying. And I think that this year is a tough year to judge the future fully. I do think that the draft picks are going to be extremely important regardless of the situation, because that's something that I feel like Belichick always struggled with, was he never really got enough talent on offense to support Tom Brady. And I think that that's part of the reason why Brady started getting frustrated with the system. And I think that outside of Gronk and Edelman, who Brady had played with for so long and had this chemistry with, there weren't a lot of other players on offense that really fit Brady's playing style. And so I think they need to decide how they're going to build their team. And if they want to build their team around Cam Newton, then they need to draft players that fit Cam Newton's playing style. And I think that that's where all eyes are going to be on Belichick when it comes to the draft and what he does with his draft picks this year. But I think you're right, though. I think there's still promise and hope with this team, whether they make the playoffs or not this year. It was a tough year, but I think if they do make the playoffs this year, no matter how far they get, that we should see that as an accomplishment, just because of everything that they've overcome. And even the fact that they're 6-6 right now, when they started the season off 2-5 and people ruled them out at that point, that they've been playing really good football since then. And they've been, the defense has been looking better the last couple of weeks, and they've really been focused on trying to make both sides of the ball correlate and be consistent every game, because there were issues when either the offense wasn't playing well or the defense wasn't playing well, and both weren't coming together. So the last couple weeks, it seems more like it's more both sides of the ball are clicking. And if they can keep doing that, then I wouldn't rule them out just yet. And I think that Belichick will come into the last 4 games with a game plan. He'll have the team prepared. The Rams are going to be tough. They're a good team, and plus they have a short preparation for that game. So I think that one's going to be tough. But Belichick's seen this division. He knows the coaches in the division and their coaching style. He's seen these quarterbacks enough times, and I think that he'll get the team prepared for those games. It's just a matter of if they can show up on both sides of the ball at the same time, because that, I think, has been the biggest issue, or one of the biggest issues this year, is when the defense isn't on point, the offense is, and when the defense is on point, the offense isn't. And so I think that that's a serious problem, but how they looked against the Chargers is how they need to look every week.
Yeah, I'm hoping they're able to pull that off, especially with the Rams. I think the Rams will be the toughest game they play coming up, as this team is currently 8-4 and at the top of the NFC West. So I'm hoping they're able to pull it together for that game, but I think that's one of the most challenging they're going to see this year. I mean, other than their game against the Kansas City Chiefs, I think
that was a tough
that's going to be, that was a really tough game. And the Chiefs have really shown how dominant they are. They're still carrying all their momentum that they had from last year's Super Bowl winning season. So it's great that even under the circumstances, they have been still able to carry that forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that we're going to see some close games in the next few weeks. I think that it's not going to be an easy road at all. I mean, the Bills, they look really good on both sides of the ball too, and the Patriots came really, really close to beating the Bills last time. And so I think that we know they have the capability to beat the Bills, and if the Patriots team that has shown up in the last couple of weeks against the Cardinals and Chargers is the Patriots team that shows up against the Bills, then they can win that game. But again, it's a matter of clicking on both sides of the ball. And I mean, the Bills are having an incredible year. Josh Allen, their quarterback, he's having a great year. So I think that that's going to be a tough game. The Dolphins will be tough because now they have Tua starting, and Tua wasn't starting when the Dolphins played the Patriots last time. So that's going to be hard to anticipate too. So these next 3 games are going to be very, very, very vital and very important. But if they can win those games and keep the momentum going, like you said, then there's no really counting them out right now. I mean, it's hard to be fully in on them, but it's hard to be fully out on them too, because now with them being 6-6, it is a very much a different conversation that we're having now than we were earlier on in the season, or even as up to last week when they won last week, and it was a good win against a good Cardinals team, but then they were still 5-6. Everybody was like, like they could still, they still might not carry that momentum into the next game because they seem to have that problem, but they carried that momentum and then some by having that win over the Chargers. So if they can keep playing like that and keep the momentum going and trust their coaching and trust in the defense that they have, because the defense, when they play well, it can be really scary. So that, and granted, they've had injuries too to some key players, so that hasn't been easy either. So there's been a lot of things that have gone wrong, but despite all of that, the fact that they're still sitting here considered in the hunt for a playoff spot is pretty remarkable, to be honest.
It really is, and I'm proud of what they've been able to put together this year. And I think it'll be really fascinating to see what these next 4 games hold for the Patriots. And even if they don't make the playoffs, I think my eyes are still on that 2021 draft, because I think that's going to determine a lot of things for the future of the Patriots. It'll determine whether or not the dynasty continues under a new quarterback or whether they fall to the wayside. So I'm hoping that they get the players they need to continue to play as dominantly as they have.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with all of that. I think that there's a lot of speculation and a lot of different thoughts going through people's heads right now, because I think people don't know what to think. Because first of all, nobody's used to seeing this. At least people in our generation that grew up watching all the Patriots' success aren't used to seeing this and all the struggles. So people are sitting here like, am I supposed to think about this? This is weird to me. Like, the Patriots are supposed to be really good, and the Patriots are supposed to be winning the AFC East and are supposed to be a shoo-in for the playoffs. So I think that this is an adjustment for everybody. And we knew that this was a possibility with it being the first year without Brady. We knew that that was going to be a risk, that coming into the season, that it was going to be the way that it was. But this season had a really, really, really solid chance of going really badly after everything that happened to them, and their record at the beginning of the season there was a real chance that this season could have gone very poorly, and it hasn't. I mean, they've improved in a lot of different areas. I think Cam is starting to really pick it up a little bit and learn his offense a little bit more. I think some of the other offensive players are starting to adapt too and pick up on how the system works. And I think that all of that gives us promise, but not necessarily like, oh yeah, they're going to win their next 4 games and they're going to go to the postseason, because that's a little bit still too hard to gauge right now. But if they beat the Rams this week, then I'll start to feel a little bit better, because that'll be the first time they're over 500 this year, and I'm going to start to really feel like maybe they do have a chance, because with everything that they're still doing this, and the defense is starting to finally come together. So I think that there's promise, and I think it's definitely going to be a very exciting last 4 weeks of the season to see what happens with them.
It definitely will. So I can't wait to see what the Patriots have in store.
Yeah, I can't either, but it definitely was a real pleasure having you on the show with me. I really enjoyed hearing your perspective, and I'm sure everybody else did too. And it's an honor to have heard a little bit about, you being on the coaching side of things now after being an athlete, and hearing your perspective on how much different it is being on the coaching side and having a different kind of pressure on you when it comes to competitions and everything like that. So it definitely was a pleasure having you on and hearing your input on everything.
Thank you so much, Gabby.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for joining me. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Boston Balling. As always, you can find the podcast on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram at Boston_balling_podcast. We're on Twitter at Balling Boston. You can find the podcast on any streaming platform, so Apple, Spotify, and any other podcast streaming platform that you follow or that you pay attention to. And there's a Facebook page called Boston Balling and a Boston Balling YouTube channel. So it's pretty much all over the place. So if you search Boston Balling, you can find it pretty much on anything. I really appreciate everybody's support and for tuning in to this live stream. I see that we had a lot of interest this week, so that was exciting. So I hope everybody has a great week, and I'll see you again next Tuesday. Thank you, everybody.